demon arrived all at once, with no buildup. It smeared itself over the walls and ceiling like a blob of black ink. The air in Ravenfurth's little apartment was electrified, and the stench of sulfur made her cough. She shivered, both from the drop in temperature and from the icy tendrils of shadow that slithered out from the demon and wrapped her up. Somehow she tasted rotting meat. She gagged and swallowed her vomit. Raven took a moment to sputter and gulp. Once she could speak, she bent to her knee and intoned,
"Beelzebub, Lord of the Flies, Prince of Shadow, I come to you, a lowly maggot, and ask for your guidance."
The formless black of Beelzebub took the shape of two great, veiny wings that stretched from floor to ceiling. They passed over the candles, arrayed in a pentagram over the floor, and snuffed them out. For a moment, darkness was total. Then a sphere of eyes appeared in the center of the demon. Each of them glowed like miniature moons. They chased each other in endless circles between Beelzebub's wings, dozens of them, and their mad orbit threw a dance of pale white light over the room. Raven gasped at the terror and beauty of it all, her breath visible. The eyes glared at her as they revolved, drawing her in. They were lidless, colorless, infinite black abysses surrounded by moonlight. If she let them, they would drag her soul into some pit of eternity, some screaming underworld that she could never escape from. She forced herself to look away from them, focusing her attention on the thin trails of smoke rising from her blown-out candles. The wood floor was rough on her bare knee, but she welcomed the pain as a distraction.
"What do you see, child?"
Beelzebub's voice was like the buzz of some vermin's wings, a whisper in a cloud of locusts. It didn't come from his location in the room, or from any location. It was a sourceless presence, welling up from the depths of Raven herself. She took a shaky breath. Vengeance! She visualized her target in her mind, saw him turn slowly from a man into a squirming white pupa. Beelzebub laughed, a sound like a swarm of bees blasted with fire.
"The maggot would bring her lover down to her level. She would make him a maggot in her image."
Raven quickly batted down a surge of anger. If she let the demon goad her, it would gain control of her. The reverse, of course, was the goal here.
"He is one already," she spat. "He's filth. I want him to see himself for what he is, to be unable to deny it."
Beelzebub laughed again, so loudly it made Raven hiss in pain. She covered her ears, though it was useless to do so.
"If you would condemn one to low places, you must first walk them yourself."
Then, in an instant, Beelzebub was gone. The apartment was dark and silent. There was a general charge to the atmosphere, a residual pressure, but this faded quickly as the room warmed up again. "What the fuck?" Raven asked her empty home. "Hey! What the fuck?" She thought about trying to re-summon the demon to demand clarification, or maybe some kind of spiritual refund. But she fell as she tried to stand, suddenly overcome with exhaustion so deep that even thought was an impossible burden. A distant, foggy notion came over her that she should crawl to bed, but she was unconscious before she could twitch a finger. The first thing Raven noticed when she awoke was her legs. She had 30 of them. 15 pairs. After that, she didn't notice things. Her perception was consumed by vibration. The world was an endless, raging sea of it, each wave distinct in its size and character, and smell. Beings and objects no longer had sense, they were sense. Smell was as tangible and solid as matter had been before. Before what? Raven wiggled her antennae, and from these tiny movements a new tsunami of smells washed over her. Something was wrong. She shouldn't have had antennae, and she definitely should not have had 30 legs. She tried to look around, But vision didn't mean as much to her as it used to. It was lower resolution, mostly an interplay of light and shadow. There were vague, blurry shapes, but not much else. This wasn't a tragedy. You didn't need sight when smell told you so much. Pulses of vibration coursed through each of her legs, though the intensity varied with each limb. It was all about the distance from the leg to the source of the vibration, the angle, the location and momentum of the vibration in relation to the points of her 30 feet. By all this, Raven judged that a spider about her size, maybe a little smaller, was crawling below the other end of the TV stand. Not that she knew what a TV was, or could form any concept relating to stand. To her, these were just surfaces, obstructions, things to be traversed or circumnavigated. Raven herself was curled up in one of the corners, right where the leg of the stand met the floor. With a slight quiver of her left antenna, her mind was jabbed with the sharp needle of the spider's pheromones. It was working on a new web. Each secretion of silk ignited a fresh spark of acrid stench. Raven, as a human, would have compared this to a whiff of some extremely spicy herb. Something that would have made her eyes water and her nose run, having inhaled it from too close on. But in her current form, it wasn't as unpleasant as all that. It was delicious. It was the smell of a banquet meal to an empty stomach. The instinct to chase it would normally have been irresistible. The only thing that stopped her from acting on it now was the odd existential itch she felt. A realization of wrongness growing in the back of her mind. Reality had taken a bad turn somehow. She wasn't supposed to be this. What happened? Before she could work this out, the vibrations of the spider shifted. Its smell grew more sour, less metallic. It had ventured a few steps from its corner. Now it was close enough for Raven to smell the sweet, seductive oils coating its exoskeleton. Her juicy feast was in range, and in her thirst, there was no time for concerns about her existence. Eons of evolutionary instinct screamed at her to pounce. She was too near to her prey, and too fast for it to escape. She rocketed toward it. Her legs were a rapid-fire orchestra. Their smooth harmony propelled her so fast that it felt like flight. If she had been human, she would have laughed from pure exhilaration. She was a living roller coaster. The spider sensed her bearing down on it and tried to dart away, out into the open air of the living room. But it was hopeless. Raven was on it in less than a second. She crashed into it and knocked it on its side. Her backside coiled around the spider's body. Every one of her legs drummed against its soft, moist form, wearing down its defenses. The legs of the spider kicked helplessly and twitched in agony as Raven sunk her forciples into its back. The spider's blood and other fluids seeped into her mouth and flowed over her forciples like a gentle massage. Raven moaned internally with ecstasy. Her pleasure pulsed in several rapid bursts before exploding in a feeling that reminded her of orgasm. Venom ejaculated from her forciples and into the open wound of the spider. In her mind, she screamed with delight. But the delight quickly turned to horror as she realized what she was doing, and thereby what she was. As the venom took effect and the spider's desperate fighting lulled, the hold her new instincts had on her lessened. A ghost of reflective human thought returned to Raven, and through it, horror evolved into despair, disgust, delirium. Her body remained on autopilot and began its feast. The meat of the spider was still delicious. The unborn eggs it carried were a delicacy, like a fine and rare sauce. But Raven couldn't stand her own enjoyment of it. Her worm-like frame unwrapped itself from the spider and she studied it, felt the blood and euphoria of victory running through it. Her antennae jiggled, savoring the aroma of the spider's open innards. She couldn't form words yet, couldn't even remember what they were. But if she could have, her entire sense of self would have been reduced to one. No. Everything the word did or could signify, revulsion, grief, rejection of being itself. This was how she now defined herself. It was all she had left. If she went any further than no, than the negation of what was, she would be left with a truth she knew would shatter her. That she had become vermin itself. She had become a centipede. It was a long night for Raven. Her self-awareness continued to expand, but she didn't gain any autonomy. The instincts of the centipede retained total control. All she could do was watch, and taste, and feel. Most of the night was spent eating the spider, with intermittent breaks spent wandering the dusty floor beneath the TV stand. A few intriguing vibrations caught her attention. There may have been a couple silverfish scuttling on the other side of the room, but she wasn't hungry enough to do anything about them. Eventually, morning brightened the edges of the floor outside the stand, like the coming of a tide. It brought a sluggish warmth to all of her legs. Between that and her full belly, it was a relief to give in to sleep. But just as she began to doze, a massive vibration startled her. The entire TV stand was jostled by some quake, some shift of weight. Following a new trail of scent, Raven looked outside and saw a gigantic form rising. The sun had turned the apartment into a formless blaze of light, but here was a shadow of cosmic proportions, growing so tall that Raven wondered if it would ever end. Its movement unleashed a torrent of oppressive smells. Most of these, Raven realized, had been there all along, but had been so ambient and unchanging that they escaped notice. Whatever this thing was, it was undeniably, enormously alive. It made a sound that shook the universe, and this sound created a new storm of stench. The smell was like a mountain of dead things, prey that had been eaten and coughed up. With that, the Colossus stepped across the room. Each footfall a new shockwave over the floor, the TV stand, the world as Raven knew it. Her impression, as she watched, made for an interesting dichotomy. Her centipede instincts regarded the monster simply as a thing to avoid. It was a mass of uncertainty and unnatural smells, and this was a recipe for fear. But Raven's human side was overcome with awe. Was this what it was like to look upon a god? What other being could make her feel so small and powerless? The great beast let out another air-shattering heave and collapsed on a huge mass of darkness that sat opposite the TV stand. Something even larger than the beast itself, though decidedly non-living. It never moved and barely smelled. A human would call it a couch, but Raven didn't remember that. Raven felt a subtle surge beneath her with the impact. If she'd been lighter, it would have launched her skyward. After that, the beast was still. It only took a few minutes of quiet for her centipede brain to lose interest and surrender again to the heavy sleep her feast had made possible. But Raven clung to the non-sight of the creature as she drifted off. Somehow this being, this colossus, meant everything to her. Like all good deities, it was the most terrifying thing she could imagine, and yet the most hopeful. It represented all possibilities, hideous and beautiful. It was the only thing grand enough to transcend her insect mind, awesome enough to encourage her humanity. All of these were concepts she only dimly remembered, but the impulse to grow, to become more, to grope upward in the direction of some heaven. It was there, and it made her feel, in at least a minuscule way, human. She reached for this feeling as she fell into dreams of dark, dripping places, the tearing of exoskeletons and the swallowing of limbs. Raven woke up at dusk. The beast had gotten more active during the day. It moved around its nest with the strange slowness that was typical of giant things. Often it would disappear around the corner for a time, before returning to its favorite place across from the TV stand, where Raven could watch it and sniff in its general direction. Around sundown, the beast moved off to that place around the corner. There was a sudden rush of cool air and an influx of new smells. The world quaked with new vigor. Raven, having digested her meal in her rest, was fresh and alert. Curiosity had the freedom and energy to take hold of both her insect mind and the germ of human thought that had become her norm. She journeyed across the dank, unkempt landscape that was her home, and all the way to the back wall that this TV stand sat against. She trudged over clumps of dust and human hair that were like steep, unsteady hills. When she reached the wall, she climbed it. There was a thrill to this. She rose higher and higher, like walking up the side of a skyscraper, though that may have just been a projection of humanity. For the centipede, there wasn't much to be thrilled by. To scale a wall was just to wander a forest of intermingling smells amidst the incoherent dance of light and shadow, same as anything else. To walk the ceiling would have been equally unremarkable. So Raven took this little squirt of childlike excitement as a win. Eventually, she reached a height where she could peek over the edge of the television screen. Just as she did, the beast re-entered the room with a second, even larger being. The atmosphere quivered as they threw rapid clicks and drones of noise at each other. Raven found these fascinating. There was something oddly familiar about them. The sounds escalated into an outpouring of acidic smells. They reminded her of the pheromones of some of her prey, only far stronger, almost unbearably so. The two god beings entangled themselves in each other, their darknesses blending together. Bits of thin, billowy shadow fell from them. Were they shedding their skins? That didn't seem right, but Raven couldn't imagine what else might have been happening. They fell together onto the couch blob and writhed. The sounds they made grew harsher as they melded more and more into one mass. Raven's antennae itched as the stench of the god's pheromones became a cloud that filled the room. It was hard for Raven to tell how long this odd ritual went on. Even if she had remembered the concept of time, her perception of it was totally out of whack. At some point, though, the beasts cried out in unison and released an explosion of new stench. What had been a smoky, drifting odor became a harsh, burning oppression. It seemed to be everywhere at once. Raven retreated downward, back under the TV stand. This helped only slightly. But if the initial stream of scents had been a long, dim burn, this last one was a short, bright blaze. It faded quickly, and Raven's senses cleared up again. The beasts had stopped moving, and communicated now with low, murmuring vibrations. Raven listened to these with appropriate rapture. When gods speak, Raven figured, you pay attention, whether or not you understand. For a long time, she didn't understand. But as her legs grew more acquainted with the reverberations of their talk against the floor, seeds of meaning popped in her mind. Certain hums and buzzes in the gods' conversation would repeat, and with each repetition, Raven felt a needle prick of ancient memory. One of them finally flashed in her eyes, gleaming and brilliant like a religious vision. The. That was a word! Raven remembered! Humans spoke with words! She had once used words! Having remembered one, new words came more easily for her. She crouched down, pressing her long, slender belly against the gritty floor, savoring every vibration of phrase. He, she, was, is, ate, alive, fuck, will, see. Language. This was language, that quintessentially human tool. And Raven was regaining it. She arched upward and jiggled her first few rows of legs, unable to contain her excitement. This was another victory in itself, having asserted such direct control over the centipede's body. She bathed in relief and delight the rest of the evening, until hunger came. Hunger weakened her human will, and strengthened the drive of the insect. She knew that soon she would have to give in and hunt. But she didn't despair. Today was a day of progress. Today she evolved. By the time the gods fell silent, Raven had managed to piece together what could have been called a train of thought. It went something like this.
Betrayed me. Let's fuck again. Make him watch. Make him see. Make him feel what I feel.
A flood of light blinded Raven while she was hunting. The gods had been silent on their couch for hours. Everything had been dark. One of them must have gotten up to use the bathroom, a concept Raven was proud to have remembered. A few seconds after the flash of light, there was a harsh screech. Raven's antennae recoiled. A tsunami of unpleasant smells pummeled her, and she fled. She didn't have to think about it. Her body flooded with danger signals, and ancient wisdom made her run. She darted across the wall, which provoked another shriek from the angry god. She'd been right in the middle of this wall when the light came on, as exposed as she could have been. The god hurled a solid black mass at her, and she arced down to the floor, barely dodging it. Once again, the beast screamed, this time with a word. She made it to the floor, which was bubbling with vibrations. The second god had gotten up now. Raven heard it speak and strained to decipher the words as she rounded a corner.
What the happening? Why are... Fucking centipede! The wall! Through my fucker ran!
The gods followed her around the corner. She was still sprinting, all 30 legs firing, burning.
Where?
Said the second god. Its voice was deeper than its companion, its vibrations longer, more drawn out. They launched another deadly projectile at Raven, which crashed just behind her like an asteroid. There was a thin, dark opening ahead. If she reached it, she would be safe. But her legs were exhausted. She was starving now, dry with thirst.
God damn!
Cried the first god, the one who lived here.
Hate fucking bugs!
Finally, Raven reached the gap and dove in. It was a beautiful place, dark and moist, and it turned out the gods had favored her in the end. There was food here. As Raven barreled inside, she surprised 3 silverfish who were staying in this cavern, munching on crumbs that had puttered into it long ago. They ran, shooting for the far end of the place where it was darkest. But Raven pounced on the nearest one and stabbed her forciples deep into its back. It twitched and seized, and then grew still as Raven's venom seeped inside. Trusting her venom to subdue her prey, she jumped off, hoping to catch at least one of the others. Her exhilaration at this unexpected buffet had restored some of the energy she lost running from the gods. She chased down the slower of the two and caught it easily. This one she wrapped up with her lower half and held down so she could eat it fresh. It convulsed in manic agony as she bit into its back, breaking its outer shell and chomping down on its warm, juicy insides. The euphoria of a successful hunt consumed most of Raven's senses, but with a dim spark of human thought, she listened for the speech of the gods. She heard the one with the lighter voice say,
Have to move out. Can I live with a piece of worthless under my fucking fridge?
Raven was chewing on an eyeball when the next attack came. A long, flat object swung in from outside and swept her up. It dragged her, along with the half-eaten carcass of the silverfish and other random debris, toward the light. Raven climbed atop the thing and down the other side of it. She turned and saw it capture the uneaten silverfish too, the one she'd poisoned. It brought everything out into the apartment. The god growled in disgust and anger as it looked upon its haul. Something flat and porous came down hard and crushed the uneaten silverfish. Then it was all swiped away, and Raven could see nothing but light. After another second, the flat weapon slid toward her again. She retreated to the back wall where it couldn't reach, then sat there and watched. The object displayed a pattern. It would lash in from the opening, twist and slide around a bit, and then sweep outside again. After a few iterations of this, the god screamed. That terrified Raven. It was a deafening, powerful sound. The second god appeared and admonished the first.
Calm down.
It said,
It's just fun. hurt anyone. Don't tell me, calm down. I hate damn bugs. But kill other bugs. Oh well, you sound psychopath. It's not a big deal.
For some reason, that comment infuriated the first god. She pounded the floor, which felt like an explosion beneath the earth.
It's a big deal to me, selfish prick. Okay, who's psychopath? I let stay in my goddamn my home. Don't start acting like him. Is all want from me to do with him? I'm not anti-X. Sign up for that.
Their voices reminded Raven of storms. Even her insect mind had heard thunder, though it couldn't have comprehended it. Each wave of anger got more ferocious. The vibrations of their wrath made Raven want to inch away, but she was already tight against the wall.
Didn't sign shit.
The first god said.
Didn't make fucking contract. What are lawyers? Okay.
The second god replied. The floor rumbled with the rhythm of the god's march.
Where are they going?
The first god shrieked.
Leaving Mudhouse fucking wannabe witch. Just like him. You're just him, you lying shit.
Raven!
The second god bellowed.
You're insane!
At the sound of her name, the world bent and cracked. Of course! She was Raven! Raven Firth! That was her name! She had a name! She knew what names were! It was so obvious now, just from hearing it. It was so natural, so matter of fact. How could she have forgotten? She wasn't a centipede. She was out there in the apartment. She was a goddess. A change in air pressure itched up her legs. New smells wafted in. Rain, mud, some flowers on a balcony. For a split second, her vision changed. She saw flashes of color. The art and details of the stains and blobs on the floor. But it was over before she could celebrate.
Eat a dick and die!
She heard herself yell, now with perfect clarity.
Suck a fucking horsecock! I'll bury you!
Another explosion rattled the world, and Raven knew, somehow, that the front door had slammed. And the angry goddess continued screaming at it.
I'll curse your whole family, motherfucker! I'll condemn you! You're a worm! I'll make you a worm!
The fight with her boy toy had made God Raven sullen. After a brief hurricane of a tantrum, she plodded into the living room and was quiet. Raven the centipede sat still beneath the refrigerator and pondered. The fact that she could ponder under such circumstances proved how far she had come since she awoke in the body of vermin. That last silverfish was still around, hiding in some tiny crevice behind the countertops. The goddess had already swept away the other one she'd planned to eat, and she had feelings about this. Primitive, territorial pangs that could have compared to anger. Her instincts told her there was nothing to ponder. There was prey nearby, a feast to replace the one she'd lost. You didn't neglect that for anything, least of all lofty thoughts about the nature of being and your place in it. But she was outside. The real her. If she could find some way to communicate, maybe that would end this nightmare. The nightmare needed to end soon, because it was actually beginning to seem not quite so nightmarish. Raven was getting used to it. To sprint on 30 legs was the most alive thing she had ever done, whether it was to flee from death or to chase a new meal. And what meals they were! No banquet had ever been so satisfying, so exhilaratingly tasteful as a fresh catch, as the taste of warm blood and still living meat. If she didn't get out of this soon, she would start to like it. and she could imagine no greater hell than to live as a grimy, putrid bug and enjoy it. Everything about herself that mattered to her rebelled against the idea. Her hunger for that silverfish was carnal. It was like all the most consuming human cravings combined: thirst, starvation, and sexual release. The power of all these impulses compelled her, as one, to hunt. Asserting her will over such urges was like fighting a dragon. But she took a step forward. With heroic mental effort, she forced the dragon down and crawled out from beneath the refrigerator. Light from the apartment washed over her, which only made the dark cavern she had emerged from all the more inviting. Heaven was back there in the blackness. Every pleasure imaginable was hiding in the places that larger beings neglected, and she was walking away from them. The sense of so huge a creature as the goddess were volcanic. She was a teeming mass of biological systems, each with their own distinct odors: breath, flatulence, body oils, saliva, genital discharges, and countless others. They were overwhelming to Raven, but it made it easy not to get lost. She followed the wall of stench back to the living room, and from there to the wall where she'd started, where the TV stand sat. The dragon pulled at Raven as if it had been tied to her with chains. She strained against its weight and climbed the wall. If she'd had a voice, the effort would have made her scream. To make one step was like dragging a boulder, and she had 30 legs. But she made it. She rose over the event horizon of the television and looked upon the world from on high. There was the goddess, a great blob of stinking shadow, watching from her throne with rage that Raven could feel. The goddess gave one of her screeching howls and jumped up. She picked up one of the many dark, barely smelling shapes that comprised the room and stomped toward Raven. The vibrations of her steps battered the wall and threatened to throw Raven off. She held on with all 30 feet and reached toward the goddess with her antennae, making a desperate plea with them. The goddess only needed to hear her, to see some sign of herself in Raven's hideousness. All she needed was a hint of the message, a faint whiff of their commonality, and Raven would be free. She felt this. She knew it. She waved her antennae at the goddess, but the goddess didn't care. She saw no signs, heard no messages, smelled nothing at all. Raven had only a few seconds to realize her failure and was too exhausted now to run. The goddess swung her weapon. It came slowly, mightily, like a moon growing in the sky before colliding with its planet. Raven watched it and felt nothing, having spent everything. When it hit, she felt no pain. There was only a sudden, glorious light, brighter than the sun, and a sound like thunder, stretched and merged with the rolling of waves. The first thing Raven noticed when she awoke was her legs. There were only 2. She bolted upright and immediately winced. Her entire right side ached, as if she'd lain on it all night without rolling over. The pain was a blessing, though. The skin on her right arm was red and painted with the patterns of the floor grains. But it was human skin. It was a human arm. She crossed her arms over her chest and moved her hands up and down, from the elbow to the wrist, savoring the feel of her palms against them. All the mundane things in her apartment, once so familiar that she barely perceived them, were now sublime works of art. The morning sun beamed through the glass door that led to her balcony, warm and gentle. Outside she could see trees and their leaves dancing in the wind. Smell had taken the back seat of her perception where it belonged, and that made it enjoyable again. Even the faint, lingering odor of all her snuffed candles brought tears to her eyes. She looked at the clock and it dawned on her. 6 a.m. She had summoned Beelzebub at midnight. If she was still on the floor and could still smell the candles, that meant she had only been out for 6 hours. But she had spent at least 2 days as a centipede, and it was real. She knew it hadn't been a dream. She could still taste the flesh she had eaten, could almost still feel her 30 legs skittering over the floor. Beelzebub had made her a bug. The experience had been more real than her human life, and Raven could imagine no better qualification for a true happening than that. She stood up slowly, working cramps out of her legs. There was no sense, she figured, in getting tangled by questions about the nature of what had happened. Being a witch, she knew better than most that the mysteries of consciousness were deeper than human comprehension and deeper than time. She allowed herself to cry, in relief and joy, and she was grateful to cry. It was over. Nothing else needed to be said or pondered. Trent pounded on the front door. Raven opened it and was disappointed. He was fatter than he'd looked in his profile picture, and his hairline had receded since it had been taken. Evening air blew in from behind him and carried a whiff of sweat with it. He held up a bottle of whiskey and wiggled his eyebrows. "Are you ready to get down with it?" he asked. Raven blinked. Down with what? Trent ran his eyes over her. His head looked shrunken, like it had been compressed during birth. He tried to compensate for it with a fluffy beard, but it didn't work. He winked. Raven rolled her eyes.
Let's just get this over with.
She let him in and shut the door behind him. The thought of drinking his liquor made her nauseous. She took it from him and set it down by the door, then undid his belt. "How come you didn't film it?" Trent asked. They were on the couch, and he had her wrapped in his hairy arms, pressed against his gross body. Raven looked away from him, focusing on a round, craggy dent in the wall above the couch. She'd punched that wall a few months back and left the wound untended. The pink glow from her LED lights made it seem fleshy if you looked at it right, like some saggy, decaying elbow skin. "I don't know," she sighed. "I thought the whole point was to film it." "Yeah, it was." "I thought you wanted to send it to that guy."
I know what I wanted to do,
she snapped. He stroked her black hair, ran his finger down a streak of artificial white. "So why didn't you?" She smacked his hand away.
I didn't feel like it.
He tried to lean in for a kiss, tried to be tender. Raven groaned and rolled over him and off the couch. "Boy, you sure as hell felt like it yesterday. I've never seen such thirsty texts." Raven glanced at him from the side of her eye, then fished for her clothes and started to dress. "I feel sick," she said. "You mind taking off?" Trent scoffed. "Oh, that's it? What the fuck? I feel like I have been very gentlemanly here." She found his jeans and threw them at him. They landed over his face. He sat that way for a few seconds. When he peeled them off, he glared at her. "Thank you," Raven said, pulling her shirt over her head, "for being such a gentleman and respecting my wishes." Trent got up and dressed. He didn't speak and didn't look at Raven. As he stomped out the door, he grabbed his bottle. "I'm not wasting my whiskey on mediocre cunt." He slammed the door and left. Raven had put gruesome curses on people for tamer comments than that. But now she felt nothing. She sauntered over to her kitchen table, a small black rectangle covered with sigils, totems, and old tarot cards. The cards were all face down. She picked one up and chuckled. The Death card. A skeletal reaper raised a scythe to her, as if in toast. She let the card flutter back down to the tabletop. Yesterday, she would have thought it meant something. Raven felt an odd urge to look in a mirror. She turned for the bathroom and froze. There was something on the wall. Long, dark, and spindly. No way. There was no fucking way. But it was. She stepped closer and studied the creature. Those hideous legs, looking almost like tufts of spiky hair running the length of the body, left no room for doubt. She was staring at a centipede, and it was staring back. Two stringy antennae waved at her, Had they not, she wouldn't have been able to tell the difference between the head and the tail. She wanted to be disgusted, but she couldn't summon it. There was a dull void where all her rage used to be. Without it, she didn't know what to do with herself. It had been fuel. What was she supposed to do now? Just allow the centipede to exist? In her own home? But she felt nothing. These were contrived thoughts, born of habit, not emotion. The motivation to destroy was a memory, a dream. The centipede waited there, on the wall, waving those antennae as if to tempt her to violence. Raven shook her head. "Fuck it," she muttered. She went to the bathroom and had her look in the mirror. A ghostly pale woman of 26 peered back at her, hair dyed black with wisps of white. She flipped on the light and gazed at her eyes. They were almost as dark as her hair, as they had always been. But something else had changed in them. Though they had aged since she last saw them, they were somehow more innocent. They were sharper, clearer, unclouded. They saw what they were looking at, rather than attacking. They scanned the world and left it alone. Raven shut off the light and went back to the living room. The centipede was gone. No doubt it was crawling around in some lightless place that Raven never dusted. It would find some other hidden, creeping thing and kill it. There would be a gory feast. Raven looked through her glass door, out over her balcony and into the woods. The sun had sunk below the trees.